way, Satan here sees Adam and Eve and sees that he has no control over them in the garden. That as long as they're in an uncompromised state in the garden, where God dwells along with them, that he has no access to them and he can't harm them or kill them or hurt them, right? But he also understands that the Garden of Eden has a gate. And that while a gate can be used to enter, it can also be used to exclude. And if he can get Adam and Eve outside of that garden, there he can kill them, right? If he can get them outside of the control and outside of the presence of God and into his domain, he'd have power to kill them. And so that's what he seeks to do. He seeks to lie to them, to deceive them, and to get them to rebel against God, and he knew that God would have to kick them out. And by virtue of kicking them out, he'd have them right where he wanted them. And so Satan here is this strong man, okay? And he is in control of this domain. This is his. And Satan has bound all of us with strong chains and cuffs and fetters and jackets. And many of us find ourselves like that today. And we're like birds with broken wings. We're free to fly, but we can't. And even though we would like to fly, perhaps, even though we'd like to be holy, we'd like to be righteous, and we're free to be righteous, we're free to be holy, we can't because we have a broken wing now. And that brokenness is by virtue of our rebellion against God and the lies that are binding us. I've never known anybody personally who was demon-possessed, but that really doesn't matter, because I've known hundreds of people who might as well have been demon-possessed because they were possessed by a lie. And they had a lie or deception that was in control of their lives, and that's how he does it. Now, to me, this is important to know, that Satan has power sufficient to imprison you. And what Jesus is saying there in verse 21 is that because Satan has power sufficient to imprison you, because he's a strong man, that you do not have power sufficient to overthrow him. That what he has bound you with, what he has cuffed you with and chained you with and bound you with and all these other things, you are not free of your own power to get free of it. Now, there are a lot of modern preachers today and authors who kind of prescribe what I call the Hansel and Gretel approach to freedom of Satan. You remember the story of Hansel and Gretel? Where Hansel and Gretel, these two little, a brother and a sister, who were left for dead in the woods. Do you remember that? And by the way, look, fairy tales and things, they were incredibly macabre, right? They were pretty dark and ugly, but anyway. Hansel and Gretel were left for dead in the forest by their parents. And they were left to their own devices. And remember, they got hungry, and they came upon the gingerbread house. Do you remember that? And they started eating the gingerbread house. And this witch walked out the door and said, "Who's nibbling on my house," right? And she found Hansel and Gretel. She invited them into the house and offered them more to eat and cocoa. And they sat down there. And they didn't realize that the witch was not being nice to them, but simply wanted to capture them in her house, that she might fatten them up and eat them. Well, you might remember that while she got Hansel locked in a cage where she was trying to feed him and fatten him up, she was using Gretel as her servant. And do you remember the part of the story where she was finally ready to cook Hansel? It sounds so awful, but and she heated up the oven, and she was trying to show Gretel how the oven worked, and she had the oven door open and it was hot. Do you remember what Gretel did? She just walked up to the witch and just shoved her in the oven and locked the door behind her, and then went and freed Hansel. I guess that was the end of the story. But the point of that story was that, hey, if somebody is seeking to oppress you and to bind you, know that you're stronger than them. And there's no reason for you to be bound and imprisoned. You should just attack them and overthrow them and kill them. And I think a lot of people like to think that whatever it is that's binding you or cuffing you or restraining you in this life, you need only confront Satan yourself and say, "I don't want to be like that anymore," and for you to overthrow Satan. But of course, that's impossible. You're not strong enough to do it. You are effectively imprisoned by Satan, and you will be for the balance of your life. Without a Savior, without somebody to rescue you, there is no freedom. There is no escape. Turn with me for just a moment quickly to Psalm chapter 14. I'll show you what I mean. If you turn to Psalm 14, this is something David had to say. One of the songs he intended his people to sing. And if you look at it here. Psalm 14, verses 2 to 3. It says here, "The Lord has looked down from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one." So David says, he gives this picture of the Lord looking down from heaven on all of us. And he's trying to see if there's anybody who understands, if there's anybody who's free, anybody who knows the truth. And they're all corrupted. They're all under the spell of lies and deception. And nobody's doing good. Nobody's even seeking to do good. And that's where we find ourselves today. Okay, so that's the first assertion that Jesus makes in this passage, that there's a strong man who has bound us, and as long as nobody comes and overthrows him, he will successfully keep his possessions, which are you and me. But the second point that's made here is that Jesus has power sufficient to free you. Okay, look at verse 22. Back in Luke 11:22. But Jesus, there's a but here. He says, "But when someone stronger than he attacks him and overpowers him, he takes away from him all his armor on which he had relied and distributes his plunder." Now in this passage you need to read the one as someone stronger as Jesus Christ himself. And he comes and attacks Jesus, and what does Jesus say will set us free? He says, "The truth will set you free." And so he comes and he takes away his armor. And remember, Satan's armor is lies and deception. But by Jesus coming and telling the truth and speaking about it with authority and sharing it with the people and making it known to them, he strips Satan of his armor, and now now people are free from his bondage. They're free from those chains. We deserved complete destruction. A similar passage to the one in Psalms is when God says before the flood that he looked down on earth and he saw that there was only wickedness in men's hearts, and he just got grieved that he made them in the first place. Do you remember that? And he sought to destroy the world. And he nearly did do a rewrite. He nearly did destroy everybody. But of course, Noah found favor in his eyes, and so he was spared. That's the original intent of God. God never intended to do a rewrite. He never intended to abandon the story. He's going to accomplish his will one way or the other. And so, to me, that's the great joy in a passage like this, and that's the great joy in the story and the witness of Jesus Christ. The first prophecy of Christ's coming was in Genesis chapter 3, not long after Adam and Eve had sinned and fallen and their punishments were given to them. Do you remember the very first prophecy that was given of a Savior coming? It said that this person would come and he would crush Satan on the head. He would crush his head. So the very first promise of a Savior had to do with this person coming to destroy Satan. And that's important to me because Jesus, throughout his life and throughout the gospel records, he gives ample evidence that he had the authority to do that, right? Jesus made it very clear not long after he came to earth that he was here to pick a fight with Satan himself and to overthrow the one who imprisoned us. He did this, he evidenced this by exorcisms. He cast many a demon out of many a person. He resurrected people from the dead. And of course, death is Satan's crown jewel. It's his greatest victory. There was the confrontation with Satan himself in the desert, where he allowed Satan to tempt him with everything that he could. And you saw there that Satan had the ability to give away all the land and the power on the earth, which was evidence that they were his. He entered places where angels feared to tread. He was not afraid to put himself in a position where many of us would find ourselves compromised. But he was comfortable doing that because of the conviction he had and the love he had for God. And of course, was his own death and resurrection. He handed himself over to Satan. He allowed himself to be killed.